What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Unparalleled Sports Talk with yours, Kwame Fisher Jones. As always, I am him. Recently, I was watching ESPN First Take. Let me be honest. Wasn't really watching the show. I saw a highlight come across YouTube Shorts of JJ Redick. And full disclosure, I am not a JJ Redick fan. It's not that I dislike the dude, but I just don't like the dude. And it bothers me when guys go right from the league that they played in and hop on a network television because I feel like they're not nuanced. I feel like they haven't gone through the rigors of the profession and figured out a way to thrive. But some guys are instantly successes. Ryan Clark, whose contract expired, the first one that comes to mind. But there are a lot of good guys out there that had success. But JJ Redick is not that good on TV. Full disclosure, he's not that good on TV. And he comes across, in my opinion, my humble opinion, as somebody that feels like he's more bravado than status. But he's entitled to his opinion, and I respect it because he played 14 years in the league. But this recent highlight of him that's been circulating where he attacks Doc Rivers is to say it's ridiculous is too simple, too simplistic. It's borderline non-logical. It doesn't make sense because it's coming from a guy who, for all intents and purposes, is the reason why Doc failed. And I get it. Right now, it's Doc hasn't won. I get it. Doc hasn't won a title outside of Boston, and Doc's blown 3-1 leads, 3-2 leads, and all those things. And we'll get to the 3-1 lead that he blew where JJ Redick was a starting player on that team and dropped the bag. But the funny thing about it is he's coming about accountability. It's never Doc's fault. But it seems to me that Doc doesn't get the same context that everyone else gets. And yes, he needs to coach better. He needs to do better. But when you look at the players that he's coached, how many of them have won titles without Doc Rivers? I'll wait. How many have been successful in championship games without Doc Rivers? Like, who's Doc hindering? Who's he holding back? What coaching mistakes has he made that the next coach came in, made those quick changes, and all of a sudden his team is ascending? I'll wait. Kevin Garnett was in Minnesota, made it to the Western Conference Finals once in like 44 years, lost to the Lakers. Goes to Boston, becomes a champion, plays in 2 NBA Finals. Doc gets no credit for that because Kevin Garnett was great. Despite the fact that Kevin Garnett didn't make it prior to Doc and didn't make it after Doc, Doc gets no credit with that. Paul Pierce, same thing. Paul Pierce was in Boston. They had a little bit of success. I think they made it Eastern Conference Finals one year, lost to the Nets, Jason Kidd's Nets. After that, were one of the worst teams in the NBA, coached by Doc. When they got better players, they got better records. So who is Doc hindering? Who is he stopping? Chris Paul made it to the NBA Finals once in an illustrious career. Once. Am I missing something? The Clippers were a solid team, had success with Vinny Del Negro, became a championship contender under Doc Rivers. But specifically in regards to Redick, it's like this dude comes in and he's talking about accountability. And it's just, where was that accountability? Like, where was this success, this accountability in Orlando? You weren't this Hall of Fame, all-star, holding players accountable player in Orlando. If I'm not mistaken, Orlando traded you to Milwaukee, where you then turned into this all-star, you turned into this great player who started up. Actually, you didn't. Milwaukee let you go. Milwaukee let you go. So Doc signs you in LA. You then proceed to have the best 4-year run of your career. You scored the most points, started the most games, and were on one of the best teams in the NBA. And now you want to take shots at this dude? Now he's the guy that has a problem with accountability. I'm sorry. When it comes from if it comes from Pat Bev, I can take that. Comes from Chris Paul, I can digest that. When it comes from Kendrick Perkins, I can understand that. But when it comes from that dude who started on the very teams that habitually underachieved, that dude whose scoring dropped from 16 points a game to 13 points a game in the playoffs, that dude, three-point shooter, was known as a marksman, 44% in the regular season, 38% in the playoffs. That dude talking about somebody's accountability? The guy in 2014, we watched Russell Westbrook and Reggie Jackson take turns washing the court, watching them go ISO after ISO on you. I know. I didn't play the game. I know I'm not I'm not allowed to criticize players because I don't know the game. I never played the game. I didn't play in the NBA. I didn't know Elvis. Therefore, I can't talk about Elvis's music. All right. I get that. But if that's the case, then JJ Redick can't talk about any All-Stars because he's never been an All-Star. If that's the case, JJ Redick can't talk about a champion because he's never been a champ. He's never even played in an NBA Finals. If that's the case, JJ Redick can only talk about players that have been successful at Duke because that's all his resume yields him to say. Because he was on that 2015 team that lost that 3-1 lead. He was on that 2015 team that lost to Houston Rockets, that Corey Brewer and Jason Terry lit on fire. That in game 7, when they needed their prize free agent pick, the marksman to come in and give them a great performance at home, 4 for 12, 10 points, 2 for 9 from 3. Not you, JJ. You're not qualified to question someone's accountability. Yes, Doc probably knew James Harden would fit better with the Clippers than he would with the Sixers because the Clippers have better wing players. And James was looking for a new contract. And they had other players who could step up in big moments. And he'd be allowed to play his style of play. And Tyronn Lue would be a better coach for him. But Doc's not allowed to say that because you don't think he hasn't been accountable? Austin Rivers did a great job talking about this, talking about how his father's lost, been fired from the jobs for coming up short. And the interesting thing about that is, and this is when you talk about privilege, Doc Rivers gets fired. Doc Rivers gets lambasted on TV by guys who played a role in his demise. I'm going to say it again. Doc Rivers gets killed on national TV, says he has no accountability by the very dude who came up short in the games he needed him to win. But JJ was nice in Philly because in Philly, they underachieved and lost to the Celtics. Well, then when he went to the Pelicans, though, they struggled and then he washed up in Dallas. So again, I go back to the very first question I asked you. Where has Doc Rivers hindered someone? And I get it. It's kill Doc time. Everybody's taking shots at annihilating Doc Rivers. I get that. And I understand that. And it's part of the job. But not you. Not you. You don't get to do that. When your resume suggests that you have been yet to be held to the very same standards that you're questioning Doc Rivers hasn't been held to. Yes, Doc should have closed out some of those series. He should have made adjustments. But Ty Lue was sitting right next to him, and I'm not seeing Ty Lue cutting down any banners with the Clippers, but he's had injuries. So again, we give context to Ty Lue. Yes, there's some very slippery questions that need to be asked about what transpired in Milwaukee. And their general manager needs to be held accountable. And we can go through that. But every stop needs to be addressed. It's not like Doc, it's not like Doc hasn't done a great job in the spots he's been at. And when you start out with Orlando, you go back to what he did with Orlando. When he took that team and he had the Detroit Pistons on the ropes with Tracy McGrady, who once again didn't make it out of the first round in his entire career. I think he latched on a little bit of San Antonio towards the very end. But think about that. Tracy McGrady hadn't made it out of the first round in his entire career. Gets traded to Houston, doesn't make it out of the first round with Yao Ming. But we don't question Tracy McGrady. We kill Doc. And that Orlando team with Andrew DeClerc and Mike Miller and those dudes, they weren't world beaters. David Armstrong or what is that name? I can't even remember Dennis Armstrong. I can't even remember the dude's name. Darryl Armstrong. I had to think about it. Darryl Armstrong. Undrafted dude. Now I think he's assistant in the NBA. That Orlando team overachieved with Doc Rivers. He was coach of the year, I believe. They wound up losing to the Sixers in the first round and to the Detroit Pistons with Chauncey Billups. You know that Pistons team that went to 4 straight Eastern Conference Finals. But again, Doc didn't get the job done, so we're going to kill Doc. We're not going to kill Tracy McGrady. In fact, we're going to celebrate Tracy McGrady for scoring 70,000 points against the Spurs in the final 3 minutes or final 30 seconds, 90 seconds of a game. But forget the fact that he never made it out of the first round. So let's fast forward. He goes to Boston. Boston didn't win a title almost 20 years before Doc arrived. Hasn't won a title since Doc left. Paul Pierce didn't win a title prior to Doc. didn't win the title after Doc. Kevin Garnett, we talked about that, MVP, one of the greatest players of all time, greatest power forward of all time, falls significantly short. And funny thing about Kevin Garnett, if you were to align Kevin Garnett's numbers and Tim Duncan's numbers against each other, they're exactly the same, eerily similar. You know what the difference is? In the playoffs, Duncan made playoff winning plays, and Kevin Garnett didn't. That's not a shot at Kevin Garnett. Tremendous player, great player. I don't want anybody to come looking for me. But the point I'm making here is Kevin Garnett won one NBA championship, went to two NBA finals. Who was the coach on that sideline? Doc Rivers. Let's stop acting like Doc Rivers isn't a damn good basketball coach. And let's start looking at some of the players that he's coached. Because that's where the accountability lies, especially when you have a dude that goes on national TV, kills him, and whose numbers suggest he was the reason they lost. Let's call that out. He's the reason they failed. And again, I didn't play the game, so I'm not qualified. But if I'm not qualified to question Jonathan, whatever, Redick, then he's not qualified to question Doc Rivers or any other NBA champion, Hall of Famer, All-Star, ever. Because he's never been any of that. He's participated in as many All-Star games as a negative. And just like he thinks he's qualified to tell Kendrick Perkins what about racism in the NBA when it comes to MVP voting. And yeah, I haven't forgotten that either. I let that go because I think that message would have been convoluted. But the entitlement and the fear or mitigated gall for you to sit on TV and say that he doesn't have accountability when you, my friend, dropped the ball, when you, my friend, went 2 for 9, when you, my friend, went 4 for 12, when you, my friend, was shown up by the great players against your, shall we say, skill set of shooting? Because you were essentially just a shooter. You played 14 years in the NBA as a shooter. Just like Doc Rivers has coached multiple teams in the NBA, you played for multiple teams in the NBA. And Doc's resume shows one of the best at his profession. Your resume shows a guy who, well, let's say, critical moments disappeared. Let's call it out. Critical moments when you were needed to yield your marksmanship, your three-point shooting was nowhere to be found. That's why Pat Bev called you out. When he said you saved your career, of course you said you had other money. Because the first thing you did was I had other options. I chose him. They were lucky to have me. You think the Clippers kind of regretted that decision when they let you walk out that door? You think them dudes, there was a reason why they went a different direction? You think there was a reason why the Golden State Warriors ascended on your watch when you were on that team, a team that you took 7 games to beat in the first round? Because they watched film and saw that there was an opportunity for you to be had on the defensive end with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. You know, I wonder if Steph Curry and Klay Thompson are the Steph Curry and Klay Thompson that we know if they didn't have the opportunity to practice against you in live action. That was unnecessary. I guess shouldn't have said that. But it's so true. It's so apropos. And it's so funny to sit and listen to you question his accountability and say you've watched this trend for years and we watched you in probably the most important game of your career do what you always done. Come up short. So, you know, I'm going to wrap it up like this and put a bow on it like this. When you talk about accountability, when you point one finger at somebody else, it's 3 pointing back at you. In the case of JJ Redick, he's not pointing, but when you shout at someone about what they're not doing and you're the reason why they're not doing it, eventually people stop listening. Hopefully that happens very soon. That's it for this episode of Unparalleled Sports Talk. Again, if you like the podcast, make sure you share the podcast, subscribe, comment, do whatever your podcast platform allows you to do. And as always, I appreciate your time here. You be easy.